Hello Internet! In this video you will be safe from my webcam, and this sound will be a bit different because it is a recording I have done 1 year ago for one of my external workshops. It demonstrates how can you use various Windows tools to troubleshoot and fix backup application issues or shadow copy issues in Microsoft Windows Server. Hopefully it can be useful for your real-life practical examples, but even if not, it's something that you may want to study if you are trying to excel in the IT or software support field. Without further ado, let's get on with it, and I wish you the great day.
This demonstration video will present you with a few tools and troubleshooting methods which can help to understand why snapshot creation fails during the backup. Right now, the tests will be run on a Hyper-V machine, which is a server created as nested hypervisor. So I had to work around a few things to make it work. And it runs a separate virtual machine, which also has Windows 2012 R2 on it. So the guest machine serves as SQL Server. As you can see, there is an instance of SQL Express and there is a database called test. So right now, I saw in my test that a backup of this machine is failing. We are failing a Hyper-V VSS writer as soon as we try to snapshot the machine. So the goal of the presentation is to demonstrate how we can get down to the root of it. Because of course you could try to make a Windows backup, see that it fails too, and that would be the end of it. But we're interested in digging a bit deeper to understand what's actually wrong and how we can fix it. So the machine is running on this standalone host. For the purposes of the demonstration, we'll be using Microsoft tools only, which will be enough to understand the nature of the issue. One of the tools is called Disk Shadow. It's a command line utility which you can run on any host if it's a server version. It can only be run on server version. So if it's a client machine, we'll have to resort to other tools like ACTrace, VSSTrace, VSSadmin, etc. So our goal will be creating the shadow copy of the volume which has this virtual machine. It is a simple test, so it's the only machine on the volume E I have here. So the only thing I need to do is to start the disk shadow, and I'll start with the login option, so I can see the log if I want to recall what happened after, and I'll call it output.txt. We'll make the log verbose, so it's the command set context sets verbose on. That will allow us to actually see what's happening during the shadow copy creation. After that, we'll have to add the volume which we want to freeze. In this case, it's volume E. And there are a lot of other commands, and we have a Microsoft article on all the different flags that can be used and different commands. And in Vim, we also have a troubleshooting article which allows you to test this by yourself. So now the only thing left to do is to create a shadow copy. But before we do that, I would like to verify that it is successful. Because if you don't do the next step, which I am about to do, the shadow copy will happen anyway, but there can be failures in the guest operating system. So what can actually fail? Let's go step by step. At first, I wanted to quickly explain what's going to happen. So as soon as we are going to freeze the volume E, there is a Hyper-V VSS writer, which will notice that there is a virtual machine on this volume. So the idea of VSS is the following. It is supposed to stop all transactions on the volume before the snapshot is taken. This way, the volume which we receive in the end in the shadow copy is consistent, which means that the applications were ready for the backup, there are no pending transactions, and we will be fine restoring data. We will not have any corruption of databases, of files, etc. So the Windows itself has a KTM system, which is called Kernel Transaction Manager, which basically controls all the transactions that are in place. So the goal of VSS is to pause KTM, but before that, all applications should be prepared. For that purpose, each application that is supporting VSS should have a VSS writer. Um, so the idea is the following. I have a window open with disk shadow. I'll start another PowerShell window, so we would have ability to demonstrate what I want to see. And preferably not on the guest operating system, yeah, here. Uh, so there is a typical command VSS admin list writers, right? It can give us all the writers installed in the system, so you can be sure that Hyper-V system, there should be a registry writer. So these components will be prepared for the snapshot and frozen properly. However, you have only basic information about these writers. So for example, if I wanted to make sure that my specific virtual machine is backed up consistently, I need to check the status of Hyper-V writer, but not the whole writer. Maybe there are multiple machines on the volume. I want to see a specific component responsible for this virtual machine. This is where disk shadow will be helpful again. So the command would be disk shadow to enter it. And the next command, instead of working on shadow copy creation, we can simply list writers. That will show us metadata of writers and which components they actually freeze. Uh, One of the things in the huge list is Hyper-V writer. I'll find it shortly here. Hyper-V VSS writer. And there will be a component called host component, which is the main one, and there will be a component called as a virtual machine. Here you can see caption online and the machine name. Online means that the machine can be backed up in consistent state. I can demonstrate you how easy it is to break this. So the Hyper-V VSS writer on the host will be the requester, which will also trigger VSS in the guest operating system because the guest has its own applications running and the guest interacts with the disk. So the applications inside of the guest should also be prepared for the backup. For that purpose, there is a service called Hyper-V volume copy requester. So as soon as we trigger on host volume shadow copy, during the shadow copy creation, the Hyper-V writer will trigger another shadow copy in the guest through this service. So for example, if the service is stopped, or maybe it's malfunctioning, or maybe you forgot to install the integration tools. Let's see what happens now. So if we go back to the host and we do the same as we did before, we run disk shadow and we list writers. That should give us the same information about writers and their components. So if we check now, the exactly same writer component of a virtual machine, you can see now the caption is stating offline. So now the machine cannot be backed up in consistent mode. If you trigger volume snapshot, it will freeze general volume transactions, but the applications in the guest machine will not be ready for the backup. So you should always avoid this situation if you have any highly transactional service or database role, which will mean that the database may be crash consistent in the backup and you may be unable to restore it. So let's fix it back. At this moment, it's not part of the testing. I just wanted to demonstrate the relationship between Hyper-V writer and the guest components, which are, by the way, a part of integration components. So this is why integration components should be up to date. Usually it comes with Windows Update, because if the version doesn't match, there may be incompatibility. So you would have the same offline caption, which means that the host cannot proceed with the shadow copy creation in the guest. So just to confirm one more time, we'll check that the caption is back to online, and we'll do our main test to try to understand why the backup is failing. So right now we are verifying the component of virtual machine. Um, it changed the order of writers a little, but I'll find it shortly. Here. So the caption is now again online. It means that now, theoretically, as soon as you trigger volume level backup on the host, it will propagate into the guest machine and trigger shadow copy in the guest. So the problem that we get from the error message in Vim is that Hyper-V writer is failing. Let's make sure it's not the case. So what we can do, from the list that we had, we can find the ID of the writer which should be verified. So it's not only the writer itself, it's a specific component responsible for this virtual machine. So I can copy the name of the component, and that will be the thing to verify. So what we do now, we type writer verify and the name of the component. That will guarantee that if it fails, the shadow copy will not be created. So the only thing left is to actually trigger the shadow copy creation. But before we do so, we want to understand what's going on. Of course, we can rely on Windows events inside of the guest operating system. It's the window that you see. But for better transparency, we can use a tool called VSSTrace. VSSTrace is a part of Windows SDK. So you can find it on the Microsoft site. It's called Microsoft SDK for Windows, and it's one of the many components. You could install the whole package, which is like 1.7 gigabytes. Alternatively, you could simply grab the exe file. So if you check the folder in the guest, it's only the exec file, so you can move it around your computers for the testing. You don't need anything else. It doesn't require an installation. And it has a flag here to include all the subsystems and login level 255. Usually, the articles online recommend 140, but in this situation, we will want to see everything possible just in case. And we'll also provide an output file. I know there is also -o option, like this, -o output txt, but what I found, it doesn't log everything and part of the information ends up in the PowerShell window. As a result, you will not get full output, which you might be interested in. So it's better to redirect all the output in the file. The downside is that you will not see anything in the PowerShell, but you can be sure that it's running in the background. So now that we started the VSS trace, it is running. It is doing nothing because it's redirecting everything, and then it will be dumped into the file when we Control C. So to stop the trace, you press the standard break combination Control C. At this moment, we can start creating the shadow copy, and we'll see what happens. Supposedly, it should also fail, because usually when the Vim backup is failing with a Microsoft Writer error, you can reproduce the same error manually using the shadow utility. And you could say that at this point it's outside of scope of support because it's a Microsoft component failing, but we can still take a look and find out what's wrong in some of the situations. I have purposely created this scenario so I know what to look for, but I will show you how you can get to the resolution. So while this is happening, there is already a shadow copy on the hosts being created, and you can see there is a VSS bad state for Hyper-V VSS Writer. To us, it doesn't tell much, so let's take a look at the events on the Hyper-V host. And by the way, since VSS is over, we can now cancel the VSS trace, Control C. Okay, so before we proceed, let's just confirm that output file was created. Here, it's 3 megabytes, so it's pretty big. And I'll be using Notepad++, which is an advanced text editor, which will let me search what I want in specific patterns. All right. Oh, by the way, as soon as I opened it, I already see VSS waiting for freeze, but we'll get onto that with it just shortly. At first I wanted to check the events. Of course, you can go in the specific event group, like application, or for Hyper-V, it is a Microsoft Hyper-V VMMS event group. Alternatively, you could go to the administrative events, which show you most of the errors and warnings. So here you notice the Hyper-V source warning that VSS writers inside of virtual machine fail to perform backup complete. So from this event, we can understand that the problem that we observe is due to the fact that in-guest writers are failing. So while the host configuration may be fine, there is something wrong in the guest. So let's switch to the guest and see what we have. I'll switch it to the full screen view, and this way we can proceed with more information. Okay, I don't need this. So in the events in the guest, if you check the errors, you can see that there is a bunch of errors here. Uh, which one is useful? Yeah, here. VSS Writer SQL Server Writer failed with some kind of error code. So now we know that it is a failure from SQL point of view. So the writer was unable to stop transactions on the databases or something else happened. Unfortunately, there's not much more errors that show us what to do. So this is where we are usually stuck if we have only events to rely upon. But that's why we started the VSS trace. So let me open the output file. There's a lot of information here because we set up a very high logging level. So we can be lost. What we can do, we can search for event name and find all in the document. I believe other text editors can also do something similar. So here you can see every step which is a part of the VSS, and it's separated by specific events. So we can see that some writers are stable here. At some point there will be a failure. Waiting for freeze, it's still waiting to finish, waiting for thaw, and where's an error? I am trying to find it. Hmm. I may be not very attentive, but it should be somewhere here. Because VSS stable means it's a stable state of the writer, and VSS failed means that it failed. But I don't see it yet here. I think, yeah, this is the error. VSS failed at prepare a snapshot. So we can find that there is an SQL writer, which was an issue. Let's scroll up a little. Here, it's part of Microsoft VSS Writer. So for this writer on prepare for snapshot, it failed almost immediately. And now the interesting question is, what kind of useful information can we get? Why did it get terminated? Well, it is important to understand that the writer doesn't do random things. It only works with the components of the writer. So let's look for the components of SQL Server Writer. We have instance, and then we need to look for the components. Writer name, adding context. I'm not sure if I will cut it out from the video, but this is the part where I usually look carefully to make sure I don't miss anything. I could look for component and find it for each writer. Okay, so as you can see, I'm a bit stuck, and it's normal if you're observing a third-party application log. Well, I know where to go exactly, but I'm trying to show what's happening if I look at this log for the first time. So what I would do, I would try to understand what do we actually have for SQL to work with. So we have a database called test, and there may be other databases here, but let's go one by one. That will bring us to the place of components. So if you look at the test, you can see, okay, here. So we see the qualified name of the writer component called computer name express, which is my instance, and test, right? So let's take a look at this in details. Now I'm looking for every entry for this. And that's what I was looking for. Component is found, right? Checking whether this component is stored. Okay. So we can see that it's finding the path, is affected path, / computer name / share / db. So this is a part, you can see it's in this thread of the component, which is a result of checking the component that we are working with. This path looks interesting. It looks like some kind of network share, which is immediately raising some questions. But let's see what do we have about this path that is being affected by the writer. So as soon as you check the path of the snapshot, you find the error. Path is not on any snapshot. So the problem can be found directly above. No machine volume found. So what the VSS writer is actually doing, it's comparing the volume, which is our volume array in this case. So we have two volumes, hidden partition and C volume. These are the only volumes that I have in the computer. I can demonstrate it. So we have the main volume C, and if you go to the disk management, there should be another volume which is not assigned to any letter, but it is present. So this is like a recovery partition and the hidden volume, right? What actually happened? According to this error message, the writer couldn't compare any of the volumes that we have with the volume root, which is obviously a network share. Now, the only question is how on earth did you decide to freeze a network share and why? As we saw before, it's a path returned by checking this component. So obviously somehow this component is referencing this path. If you don't have Management Studio, it may be a bit harder, but you could still check the paths and properties of databases through SQL CMD. In my case, I can simply go to the properties of the database and let's see what we found. It takes a while because I didn't give this machine too much RAM. Okay, so if we go to the file section, you can see that we have database file, log file, and apparently the database was mounted from a local share because I know that this is the name of my machine. So because the database is local, but it's not referenced as a local name, the writer can't work with it. So what it looks like to the writer is that the machine has database on some external location. And of course, the local machine VSS process cannot access and freeze a distant share somewhere. It doesn't matter that it's in the same machine. It's not referenced as a local volume. So the easy fix would be to replace this path to the correct one. I think I can modify it by simply clicking this. Just a second. This is Mac file size. I may have to take the database offline. I'm not a database admin, but I think that will do it. So let's see. Alternatively, you could remount it, but I'm trying to see if I can fix it. Yeah, at this point, I'll have to remove it because if it's offline, I'm not going to be able to modify it. So while it's working, I can't modify the path because it's in use. And right now, I have to remove it because if it's disconnected, I can't modify the properties. So what I can do, I remove the database, I can attach it back. But while I do that, I'll specify the proper local path. So instead of using the network share, I'll go to the path on the C drive and select the database. It automatically picked up the log file. I press OK. And here we have the database back. So it is mounted from the same files, but the files are referenced from the local connection. So let's see what happens now. I'll just try to go through the same steps. So right now we see these events which show us that we couldn't make checkpoint operation, the writers in the machine failed, and it was a nightmare, and the server gave up. So what if we drop it and we try again? We start disk shadow, we set the verbose context, we add the volume, and we verify the writer to make sure it works, and we create the shadow copy. Let's see if it goes through now. There could have been more errors, but at that point, that was the first error I found which stopped our SQL writer. Well, it's not failing yet. That's good news because before it was failing sooner. And I think in the background we can see that the machine is being backed up. Yeah, so there is a checkpoint being created for this machine. You can see it in the status column. All right. All right. As you can see, the shadow copy was done. And we can confirm it that it was okay. So if you go to the events on the server, there is no more errors. And in the application events, you can see that the database was successfully finished. And you can even see that it backed up. It's somewhere on non-existing virtual device because it's not a Windows backup. It is a shadow copy creation. But now it's fine. For database test, which was failing before, everything is perfect. So this is one of the easy explanations of how you can use VSSTrace to capture an error which you would otherwise be not able to see in the events. Events would give you some generic error about writer failure, and that would be it. But because you hooked into the VSS process and you collected the events, you could see exactly what is going on. There are many other applications of this tool, but it's not part of the video because otherwise it would be too long. I hope it was helpful and have a nice day.
Well, that's it, folks. You can see on the screen the names of the tools used in the video. For your convenience, I'll also provide the links to the Microsoft web page with the description of each tool in the description. And if you like the content, feel free to subscribe to the channel and leave your comments with any questions below. I'll be sure to make more videos on the topic in the future, and you can make personal requests if you are interested in any specific kind of training. Otherwise, I wish you a great day, stay happy if you can, and enjoy IT learning. Bye bye.